with Jesus continues, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 5th chapter of Mark's Gospel. In this first section, there's really sort of two whole stories that make up the whole 5th chapter of Mark. And so we're going to take these as two whole units, even though there's a lot going on in those stories. So I'm going to ask you to follow along. The first part of Mark chapter 5 is a story that goes chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. And it goes like this. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. He lived among the tombs, for he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there on the hillside, a great herd of swine was feeding. And the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demoniac there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed. So when we last left our heroes, so to speak, Jesus had ended the scene in chapter 4, getting the disciples, they get in the boat, they go across the Sea of Galilee. He had even said very specifically, let's cross to the other side. Now, the lake is kind of roundish, but if you're going the opposite side, the idea is, it's sort of hinting at, we're headed out of our territory, our region, Israel, Galilee, where us Jewish people live, and across into Gentile territory. Now, it's important to remember that at the time, of course, that Jesus lives, the Roman Empire occupies all of this. So there are, Roman soldiers, Gentiles, non-Jewish people, all over the place, anyway, marching up and down through your streets. But there's definitely a sense of crossing into another area of occupied territory where Gentiles had historically lived. You cross to the other side of the sea, now you're Galilee of the Gentiles. That's where the non-Jewish people lived. And so there's a sense of you're crossing a border into another area, even though, Rome occupies it all historically over the centuries. That was where those people lived. Wrong gods, wrong language, wrong culture, wrong everything. And the implicit assumption was bad people over there. Jesus steers the boat, says, "Disciples, let's go. We're going to go across to the other side." He takes his disciples with them across the boundary that you're not supposed to cross. He goes. They get to the other side of the sea, and Mark seems to highlight just how unnerving and uncomfortable this would be for, say, a Jewish disciple of Jesus. This is not just like vaguely Gentile territory. This is about as turned up to 11 as you can be. This is super Gentile-y territory, super non-Jewish. Because as they get across the other side of the sea, where people assume, those Gentiles, they consort with the wrong gods and evil spirits, and they do wicked things, and all these things that make you unclean. We're not even supposed to be around them. And look, first person who encounters them, almost like Jesus has an appointment with him, is a man who is possessed by an unclean spirit, hanging out by a hillside where they're raising pigs, an unclean animal, like forbidden by the Jewish kosher laws to eat. This person who is possessed by, it turns out, not just one unclean spirit, but a legion of them, is a danger to himself and to others, right? He's bruising himself with stones. He's breaking chains. He's living this miserable life because all of his neighbors, all the most they could do for him was, well, we'll chain him up and hopefully he won't cause more damage to us. His neighbors and friends had all given up on him. And this guy, no longer wearing proper clothes, because later on, Mark makes a note that he's clothed finally. So this guy running naked, having broken free from chains and shackles over and over and over again, reduced to an almost animal-like, people treating him like he's a brute beast rather than a human being. And hanging out, where's the only place somebody like that can live? Well, he's made a life for himself in the graveyard, hanging around among the tombs. So there's all these reasons by the Jewish ceremonial laws of cleanness and uncleanness that this guy is bad news. Possessed by a demon, that's dangerous. A Gentile hanging out in the vicinity of more unclean animals, of pigs, right? A whole herd of thousands of pigs. On top of that, possessed by the evil spirit that makes him run around naked, so there's all this sort of shame stuff going on where you're not supposed to be looking around on other people naked in public, and he's hanging out among the tombs. You're not supposed to be around the realm of the dead. That makes you unclean as well. There's all these reasons why Jesus going into this place will make him ceremonially unclean, breaking all the rules about where good, pious, holy people are supposed to go. Let's remember, in the back of our minds, at every step of the way, Mark has been trying to get us to see Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and he's not the Messiah we were expecting. So for people who assumed when Messiah comes, he will give us more rules to follow and help us to be pious and holy and separate from all the wickedness and sin in the world, that is not how Jesus operates. And Jesus seems to know exactly what he's doing, that he can't at some point say, well, I didn't realize that we were headed into Gentile territory. There's no ability for him to sort of walk this back or send out the press secretary and say, well, Jesus was unaware that he was heading into Gentile territory. There were no signs posted. How would he know? Jesus knows what he's doing, and all the evidence all around. Guy shouting profanities naked among the graveyard while the pigs are in the background tells you this is about as unclean and dangerous, ritually speaking, a situation as you can be in. And yet Jesus chooses to encounter this person. Again, you kind of have to wonder, what is it that gives Jesus the impression that the best move when he was trying to get away from the big crowds before was not just let's hang out in the water until the crowd dissipates, but let's go directly to the other side. There's a drivenness, there's a purpose, Jesus knows, almost like the Spirit's leading him, this conversation needs to happen now. Up to this point, Jesus has kind of allowed Gentile people to come around. They come from other towns and regions and things, but now Jesus is the one going, which means in this scene, Jesus is the outsider. Jesus is the foreigner. Jesus is the one everybody else looks at suspiciously and what's he doing? What are those people doing here? That kind of flips the script. That turns the tables, doesn't it? Other thing I want us to be clear about, the condition of being Gentile. While it's easy if you're Jewish to look down on those Gentiles, they do all these wrong things. They worship the wrong gods, and they practice immorality, and they consort with evil spirits, and they eat the wrong foods. It's also a matter of identity in the ancient world, right? You're born either part of the Jewish people or you're born Gentile, and that's not something you can repent of. You can't say to somebody who's Gentile, have you tried not being Gentile? It's sort of what you were raised with. It's down to who you are, but also your culture, your language, all that kind of thing. And Jesus, doesn't say, well, if they quit being Gentile, then I will accept them. Or if they quit being Gentile, I'll be willing to visit with them. Jesus goes, they're people. And clearly this person could use Jesus' help, Jesus' authoritative help as well. Because again, here's another strand of a theme we've been looking at. Jesus comes up to this man who is clearly tormented by some kind of force beyond our ability to categorize. But the best way Mark describes it is an unclean spirit, but somehow a whole bunch of unclean spirits. That he's like a whole legion of them. And Jesus speaks to get this unclean spirit to come out, just like he's been doing all along. Again, Jesus has the authority. Jesus just says the word, and the unclean spirits have to do what Jesus says. It's not magic. It's not like there's a magic spell or that Jesus needs some eye of newt and toe of dog to make this happen. Jesus, just by his authority. Again, we've been noticing along the way, Jesus exercises his divine authority just by speaking. No need for weapons, no need to get himself an angry lynch mob to do his bidding, just simply by his word, because Jesus actually has has the authority, he speaks. He spoke last week to the winds and the waves, and they obeyed him. He speaks to the evil spirits. They do what he says. And on our running list of who recognizes who Jesus is, here's another one. The evil spirits, the unclean spirit, recognize, I know who you are, Jesus, Son of the Most High God. And again, a similar weird request. Don't torment us, right? Please don't torture us. Like the assumption of an evil being is another authority would use their power to torture you. Jesus doesn't do that. Side note, Jesus is never okay with torture, and even of unclean spirits. And yet there's this weird dynamic that like Mark hints at and doesn't give us clear answers for. This story has always, for me, raised a whole bunch of questions that I got to live with. Mark doesn't give me good answers for. The why, for example, does Jesus allow the demons to do what they want? Why wouldn't he just, in a puff of divine authority say, no, that's it, you're gone, and they disappear or are cast into the underworld or go straight to hell or something like that? Instead, Jesus grants them this weird request. And then it also raises in my mind, why are the demons so interested in just causing more destruction along the way? Maybe that one isn't that hard to answer, honestly. Because in the end, I think what makes something evil, what the nature of evil is just to ruin what's good and beautiful. And like this kind of gets into a really, really important long-standing position that Christianity has taken that we probably need to be clear on. Evil isn't exactly a thing like an equal and opposite force to God. It's not like in the beginning when the universe was created, there's two equal and opposite forces. Like, again, it's not like in Star Wars where there's a light side and a dark side of the force and they battle it out who's right and who's wrong and that they're equal and opposite. There's God who creates good and beauty and order and light and life and truth. And the evil is always this taking what's good and breaking it, twisting it, ruining it, that kind of thing. There's a line, forgive me for quoting a comic book movie, but there's a line from one of the Batman movies made in the last couple of decades where Alfred the Butler says to Bruce Wayne, who is, spoiler alert, Batman, as they're trying to figure out why is the Joker doing all the ridiculous, destructive things he's doing. And Alfred the Butler says, there are some people who don't want anything rational. Some people just want to watch the world burn. I never expected there to be that kind of deep wisdom in a comic book movie that literally involves people running around like flying rodents. But there it is, that at its core, part of what makes evil so evil, what makes evil bad, I guess, is that it's not just, I want to take a good thing for myself, but just I want to ruin it for the sake of ruining. I want to destroy something good and beautiful in the world. That's sort of at its core what evil does. Takes beautiful, good things and says, I'm going to wreck it just because I can. That's sort of where the impulse of this demonic voice is. Let us go into the swine at least and cause some more destruction on our way out. You're going to make us leave this guy, fine, but at least let us cause some destruction of property along the way and kill these swine and have them go off into the sea. Now again, I would love one day to have Jesus explain why does he grant this wish? Why does he allow the demons what they want here? And I don't know. I don't know that Mark gives us an answer. It seems partly like Mark is less interested in explaining how demons work or why Jesus would allow this, and more to say, look at the nature of evil, that it's just looking to destroy and wreck things. And on the other hand, look what Jesus does when he enters a situation. He's there simply to bring life. To whatever was not fully alive, Jesus brings fully to life. Are you held captive by unclean spirits or sickness or being an outcast, whatever? Jesus breaks those additional chains and sets this person free back to his own life. So that little interlude where the demons are asking Jesus to let him go into the swine says more about the nature of evil, I think, than it does about why Jesus would do this. And maybe that's helpful too, because let's be honest, we live in a world and in a time where we are probably not real comfortable talking about things or identifying things as, that must be a demon. That's not the way our language and our world and our culture works. That's not to say that demons aren't real, but it's to say the world in which we live is not predisposed to diagnose things and saying unclean spirit must be a demon, must be the devil, but instead to look at what are natural causes that might also have other supernatural levels to them as well. I would just suggest a middle course here. It's tempting in this world where science has done so much for us to say, well, if I can't see it and I can't diagnose it or put it in a lab or under a microscope, it must not exist. Therefore, there's no such thing as spiritual realities, demons, angels, things like that. Or on the other hand, the temptation is everything comes from a demon or an angel or supernatural forces. And I think Mark is being wise, just sort of like threading, we live in a world where there is stuff that's beyond our ability to grasp or understand or categorize. There are going to be some things that science can helpfully tell us, and there are probably times where somebody who would have been described or diagnosed as being possessed by a demon in another era, we might say, oh, no, we're dealing with a mental health diagnosis, and whatever other things are going on in their spirit, there's also mental health issues that are going on, and a diagnosis and treatment, therapy, medication, whatever may be helpful there. On the other hand, I don't want us to just rule out, well, I've never had a demon speak to me, so therefore this isn't real. And let's thread this middle course. There's stuff. Let's have the humility to say there's stuff in the world beyond my ability to understand. And there are forces both for good and also evil is palpably real. Sometimes ordinary people who would be decent people get stirred up to do terrible, rotten, violent, destructive things, and they seem like they get swept up into something beyond themselves, beyond their individual choices or will. And if you stopped them and shook them a little bit and said, "What are you doing?" they might come out of it, "Yeah, what am I doing? Why would I do that terrible thing?" And yet evil is real, and terrible, terrible evils have been done in our history, recent and distant past. That means we can't shake the truth that evil is a thing. And the question then becomes, what if we're going to be followers of Jesus, how do we respond to that evil in the world? And again, notice, Jesus' response is not, this guy kept breaking the chains, I'll make super chains and chain him up more. Jesus doesn't give up on this person. His goal is to restore him. The point of Jesus' presence in the world, the point of the reign of God is to restore people to full life. Not to say, I can't do nothing for you. Lock him away and put him away and we'll just give up on him. Jesus doesn't give up on people. Even the person who has all these strikes against him, Gentile, naked, living in the tombs, hanging around the pigs, Jesus doesn't give up on this person. Now, it is interesting to note, after Jesus does cast out those spirits, and now this man is back in his right mind, the crowd is starting to assemble because they can hear the ruckus, and they come and see the guy who had been naked and breaking chains before and living in the graveyard is now in his right mind, sitting and having a regular old ordinary day like a regular person. And their first reaction is to be upset that they lost their prophets. They're mad. They want Jesus to go away because they had a nice little system, right? The system was, as long as we get to keep our business, as long as our pigs are doing fine, as long as business is booming, yeah, every so often you gotta just write somebody off, give them up to the powers of the demons, oh well, as long as my prophets don't go down. And Jesus' priority is always over life, always over human beings, always on the value of us rather than on, I'm sorry, you lost some of your prophets. Yeah, I mean, Jesus doesn't apologize. He doesn't say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that now your third quarter prophets are going to be a little bit down. Jesus is like, you got your friend back. You got your neighbor back. Aren't you concerned? Don't you care? Here's somebody made in the image of God. Here is somebody who is infinitely precious. Jesus is always going to pick people over prophets. Jesus is always going to say it's more important, how do we care for other human beings, even if that means I don't get to drive a Lexus now. Jesus is more interested in bringing life where there isn't life and setting people free when they're held captive. And yeah, sometimes that means that there's less money or less profit going around, less disposable income. It's telling, I think, when the other people see this, instead of rejoicing, yay, we got our friend back, who knows what his name is, Phil, oh, we got Phil back, that's great. Instead of being happy that their friend, their neighbor is back, they're mad at Jesus, because he's sort of exposed that they'd all just gotten comfortable with writing poor Phil off so that they could keep making a buck. This is one of the things we should be prepared for as Jesus encounters us. Jesus has a way of shaking up the things we've gotten comfortable with. Jesus has a way of pointing out in our lives the ways we've gotten comfortable with things that are terrible for other people. I mean, like honestly, here's me in an ordinary day. It is so easy for me to think about, I want to have the ability to buy cheap stuff whenever and wherever I want it. And I don't care whether the people who made it somewhere worked in a sweatshop or the people who worked at the store and sold it to me are paid a decent wage and can feed their family. I don't want to have to think about that because I want cheap stuff that I can click a button and have it there in my hands whenever I want to on a whim. That's my right. Jesus shows up and says things like, wait a second, why are you okay with the way other people might be treated like they don't matter at all, can't live decently, feed their families decently, just so you can have cheap trinkets. Maybe you should rethink that. Jesus has a way of exposing the ways we've gotten comfortable, like in systemic ways, with rottenness all around. And then the question becomes, what are we going to do with that? When Jesus points those things out and says, good news, you got your neighbor back, are we going to rejoice? Or are we going to, no, I want to have my old system, and I don't like that you poked and pointed out to me things that make me uncomfortable. We should be prepared. Jesus is going to make us uncomfortable if we listen to him. When that happens, the question is whether we will let Jesus upend the systems we thought we were so comfortable with in order to love people, or whether we will send Jesus away because we don't want to have to think about those kinds of things. This is like an everyday kind of thing. It comes down to, how do I spend my money? Where do I spend my resources? What policies are important to me? What things in how I treat other people will rise to the fore? Where do I look for ways to honor the image of God in other people? And where have I been settling for, I don't have to treat you like a person, but I'm just interested in what gives me more bucks in my wallet? Jesus is going to continuously force us to examine where our allegiance is. Later on, he'll just come out and say, you can't serve God and wealth. You can't serve God and mammon. You can't serve God and money. At some point, you're going to have to pick. And here's one of those moments. Jesus says, good news, God has showed up and freed this person. You got your neighbor back. And all the neighbors are upset because they've lost out on their money, instead of being glad that a friend, a neighbor, has come back to them. And I think that helps put into context, too. At the end of the scene, this guy says to Jesus, I want to come and be with you. And Jesus' response, at first you might think, is kind of harsh and dismissive. No, he won't let him. But hear what Jesus says. No, go back to your friend. I mean, you got your life back. This is what you wanted, right? This is the thing that you needed, right? To be restored back to your life. Now you can have your kids and spouse and family and, go back to having a life again. That's my intention, to bring people more fully to life. Jesus hasn't done this miracle just to recruit a club member. That is important too. When Jesus sets up shop, when Jesus comes to a place, he's not holding a membership drive. He's not there saying, I need more people to be a part of my team. That powers my movement or gives me more resources. Let me do something that will put on a show and get more people to follow me. Instead, Jesus comes to a place, where do people need to be brought to life? I'll do that. And Jesus isn't necessarily looking for club members. But no, you got your life back. That's the gift. That's what you get now. It's not just that the evil spirits have gone away, but now you're free to get to, sit down and have a cup of coffee with your friend again. Now you can have your life back. You're restored to life. That's what Jesus is offering this man again. I wonder, too, if we might have that mindset. Sometimes when we think about why do we do things as church, it is so easy, and the world can sniff it out in a split second. Sometimes people see, the church is doing something. They're just doing this because they are wanting to get more attention for themselves, wanting to, get their picture in the paper, or they're secretly looking for how will we get more money, more resources, more stuff for us. The world can smell that out in an instant and doesn't want that, doesn't want to be a part of something that's just sort of self-centered, where I'm doing this thing to get attention so that then you'll want to be in our club. But our purpose is to let Jesus bring people to life through us. So maybe part of our calling is to look for ways, how can we do good in the world that doesn't immediately come back and give us benefits? That we're not doing things in a way, how can we construct something that we get the attention or we get the glory? How do we point beyond ourselves? Because that's how Jesus does things. The theologian and martyr of the 20th century, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, once said, the church is the one community that exists for the sake of people who do not yet belong to it. I think something like that is what's going on in this scene as well. That Jesus hasn't orchestrated this whole little publicity stunt as a way of getting attention and more people to come follow him so that then he can come back into his own hometown and say, look how many people are following me now. He won't brag about his following or anything like that. But instead, he's come to bring life. So whether this guy does or doesn't join his club or come becoming a dues-paying member of the Jesus Fellowship, instead this is, I've come to bring life to you wherever you have the need. And now you've got your life. Go live your life. Sometimes our presence in the world isn't about hoping people will come and join our church because they came to the food drive or came to the service project that we were a part of. Our reason for being present in the world is to help embody. This is what the reign of God looks like. Anytime we're helping bring people more fully to life, whether it's helping install smoke detectors in their houses or food for the food pantry or helping support cancer or homeless families, whatever it is, when we do those things, it's not about now I want y'all to look at me, but because we're part of God's work of bringing people more fully to life. That's what the reign of God looks like. And that's what the whole first half of this chapter really is all about. So the last half of this chapter goes like this. It's, again, one large story, so bear with me and follow along. This comes in verses 21 through 43. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I'll be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw commotion, people wailing and weeping loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was about 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. Okay, I'm going to lay some cards on the table here. I can't help when I hear this scene but think of a comic book movie. Again, it's a Batman movie. Forgive me. Batman turns out to be really important to my understanding of chapter 5 of Mark's Gospel. So, classic comic book villain trope in the movies. I can remember a Batman movie, Once Upon a Time, where I think it's the Riddler has this clever trap figured out. And there's the love interest over here, and there's Robin over here, and they're both about to be killed by whatever clever machine he's built. I think they're in giant hourglasses slowly filling with sand or something like that. And the Riddler says, "You only have time to save one or the other, Batman. Who's it going to be? Your sidekick or the girl? Who are you going to save? You only have time and resource for one. What are you going to do?" And of course, at that point, the villain, in that case the Riddler, thinks he's won because he thinks no matter what Jesus picks, he's going to lose out on somebody. No matter what he picks, Batman's going to feel like he's lost. He can't save both. And I think that's part of what goes on in this scene as well. That we're set up with a situation where the question quickly becomes, who is Jesus going to help? There's two people who are in need, and it looks like it's an either or. The leader of the synagogue, this well-respected leader in the community, and it's his poor young daughter who is sick, and it's a respectable thing. It's a good, decent thing. Jesus, come help this well-respected, notable leader in the community. And then this anonymous woman just comes up out of nowhere, and she's got a need as well. And it seems like the story sets up, there's only enough time to help one person, right? And it seems like the clock runs out. It seems like when this woman reaches out and touches Jesus, the clock has now run out because a crowd comes and says to Jesus and to the leader of the synagogue, oh, too late, your daughter has now died. Don't bother Jesus anymore. It seems like there's this choice. You can decide one or the other. Who are you going to help? Jesus. And I suppose if Jesus wanted to, he could have, as he saw this woman coming, he could have stopped her. And I mean, again, we're presented with a Jesus who seems to know things that others aren't aware of. Jesus certainly could have stopped. No, I don't have time for helping anybody else. I don't have time to hear your story. Let's go to Jairus' house. But instead, Jesus allows the clock to run out. Jesus helps this woman, hears her story, and while he's listening to her story, the people come and say, sorry, Jairus, your daughter is dead. And I want to suggest an important part about what's happening here is that Jesus is given what ultimately is a false choice, a false dichotomy. When somebody presents something and says, it's either this or this, you only have the ability to do one or the other. And the right thing to do when you're faced with a false choice, a false dichotomy, is to say, this isn't either or, this can be a both and. You can find ways that this can be both and. It seems to me like this is often a struggle we still live with, because we live in a world where there's limits on time, on resources, and often our gut response in situations is this is an either or. Either we help homeless people in our community, or we have money to help people who are responding to disaster half a world away or are in need of a refugee resettlement. Either or. You only can do one or the other, so I'm always going to pick the people who are like me. That's often how we do things. Jesus in this story suggests maybe we don't have to accept those terms. Maybe it's not an either or. Maybe it's not we either help homeless people here or we help refugees somewhere else. Maybe it's not either we sing songs that everybody loves or we learn new songs. Maybe it's a both and. Maybe it's not either I follow Jesus with my life or I get to have my work and my job and my family. Maybe these are both and that we often accept the term somebody else has set for us and said it's a choice. You have to pick one or the other. Which will you choose? Sometimes the answer is no. We can do both. Like everybody is familiar with saying, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. It is possible to do more than one thing in life and to have more than one way of attending to different needs or different problems. And just because I'm focused on, yes, this is a real problem, doesn't mean I don't care about this other thing. It's possible to attend to whatever the needs are around us. It seems that's an important thing for us to remember as church, in congregations, as the church around the world. Instead of saying, we're only going to focus on this thing because it's close to home. Maybe that's a false choice, because sometimes we sort of get ourselves twisted up in that knot. We'll say, we don't want to spend any attention, time, or money on that thing until we've solved all of this. Sometimes life doesn't give us that possibility, and maybe sometimes we turn that into an excuse. I don't want to have to deal with that thing over there because it doesn't have a face to me. I've never met anybody with that problem, but this thing is near and dear to me. I only want to focus on this because I'm okay with that, or I'm comfortable with that, or that's easy, or it comes back and benefits me somehow. Jesus takes a false choice and says, nope, this can be a both and. Even though the situation makes it seem like, sorry, this lady came up, Jesus, and she took the opportunity, now you can't go help Jairus' daughter. Jesus responds, no, we're going to go anyway. He goes up to the house, sees the place where this little girl is laid, and in one of these beautiful details that only happens a handful of times in Mark's gospel, we get the actual Aramaic words from the scene. Mark says, Jesus says to the little girl, Talitha kum, and then translates for us, which means, little girl, get up, as he takes her by the hand and helps lift her up. One of the reasons I think that's so cool is these Gospels came from somewhere, right? These are stories that got handed down, and at some point, Mark, we call him Mark, wrote these down in one big volume, but Mark's not one of the original 12 disciples. He wasn't there for all these things. He'd heard these stories from somewhere. Maybe it was one of the people who were there in the room, but every so often, there are these moments that suggest this is an eyewitness report. This is somebody who was there in the room who told Mark this story, because they've held on to even just the way it sounded, the words that came out of Jesus' mouth, Talitha kum, and then Mark translates for us. That's important because that reminds us that these aren't just fables that were made up. I mean, when Aesop tells a story about a tortoise and a hare or a fox and a stork or whatever animals are in his fables, you know that it's kind of timeless, it's made up, and it never really happened. But the stories of Jesus, Mark presents as this happened, and I'm holding on to the memory of somebody who was actually there, who remembered hearing the words of Jesus, Talitha cum, little girl, get up. And then he translates for an audience who doesn't necessarily speak Aramaic. That's important. This is real world. This is Jesus who lives in our actual world, in our actual history, is given a situation where conventional wisdom says you can do one or the other, Jesus. Who are you going to help? The respectable daughter of the noted community leader or this random stranger? And Jesus doesn't say, sorry, random stranger. He cares about both. He's able to help both. Notice also, Jesus doesn't punish or chastise or scold this woman for basically cutting in line. Sometimes we get in that mode too. No, this Jairus got in line first. You should get to the back of the line, lady. And Jesus, I'm sorry, no. Jesus is able to heal both and then to go and help Jairus' daughter as well. It seems like these two stories are intertwined, so you can't really separate the woman who's healed of her hemorrhage from the story of Jairus' daughter, both because they happen in time this way, but because Mark has kind of told it in kind of a sandwichy way. He introduces Jairus, the woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, and then Jairus' daughter's story ends. It seems like Mark is trying to tell something important there. So watch, this is going to come back again later. There's going to be a couple other times where Jesus, where Mark gives us stories that sort of have that kind of sandwich feel. A beginning, a middle thing, and then we come back to the beginning. Hold on to those moments. It seems like something important is going on there. And in this story, in this scene, it seems like Mark has told the story this way to help us see both of these. It's not an either or, but both of these people's needs are attended to. Even though, again, you could make a case that there's a reason to prioritize Jairus because he's a well-respected member of the community and his daughter has so much life to live and all these reasons why she's the right person, and don't help that poor woman. You know, she cut in line. She doesn't have any standing in the community. We don't know anything about her. She's broken all these rules by touching somebody in public who's not related to her. She's broken all those social rules. And Jesus doesn't see it that way. He doesn't see his help as a reward for good behavior, but Jesus has simply come to bring life. This is what the reign of God looks like. Wherever Jesus goes, life breaks out. And I want to suggest, too, this is Mark beginning to drop hints about where this story is headed to. That ultimately this is about death and resurrection. It will come to Jesus' death and resurrection, and that's what Jesus coming in the world is really all about. Nothing less than death and resurrection. So that this whole journey isn't just, I want to hear a bunch of fun stories about things Jesus did, or hear some neat object lessons when Jesus told a fun story about a farmer scattering seed. This is about something as very real, as very serious as death, and as very hopeful and radical and mind-blowing and blessedly beautiful as resurrection. The Christian life isn't like a hobby that we do when I've got a little bit of extra time, but it's about taking things as seriously as life and death and resurrection in every moment and every day. You and I are faced with possibilities in every situation, every day, of how can we be agents about helping to allow God to bring people to life around us and in us and through us, or whether we'll miss those chances. Even in a situation like this one, where Jesus is faced with a classic Batman either-or situation, Jesus, he cuts through it. I will bring life to everybody, life for all, regardless of questions of worthiness or earning or deserving or who got in line first or who has the biggest list of needs of why they're more important. Jesus cuts through all that. There will be life for all. That's what the reign of God looks like. So I want to invite you to join us in the study as we continue along the way. Next time, we're going to be taking a look at chapter 6 in Mark's Gospel. So we invite you to be a part of this ongoing study as we journey with Jesus, getting to know who Jesus is and then who we are as we follow him. Thanks for being with us.